What's the creepiest thing that you've seen other families do that they accept as totally normal? Story 1. I remember it was around the time of Euro 2004. I went to a friend's house for a sleepover. I was 12 years old then. We arrived at his house, where both our moms dropped us off and then left. His dad was there, though. I never liked that man. Anyway, he welcomed us in the most unwelcoming way, like he hated the idea of me being there for a sleepover. We went to his room and started playing on his PS2. After about half an hour, his dad came into the room and said, "Okay, I think it's about time, Michael," my friend. Michael got up, unplugged the PS2, and handed it to his father, who took it and placed it on a high shelf. Then his dad made a gesture as if welcoming Michael for a hug, saying, "Speak the words." Michael hugged his father and said, "Thanks, Father, for reminding me to be moderate with distractions from real life." The hug ended, and his dad nodded at us to go to sleep. I went to bed, feeling completely weirded out by the whole thing. My young mind couldn't help but feel guilty for playing the PS2, like it was somehow wrong. The next morning, we woke up, ate, and greeted his mother, who was there. Michael went over to his father, knelt before him, and said, "Please, Father, can I be distracted for a while?" His mother was making coffee as if it was perfectly normal for her son to kneel in front of his dad and beg for something as simple as a little fun. His father looked at me, then at Michael, and eventually went to retrieve the PS2, like it was the hardest thing he had to do. I didn't even touch the controller. I felt so uncomfortable being there. Story 2. This was definitely abuse, and my mom did call CPS on them, but I'll share it anyway. There was a family we knew while growing up where the father had some bizarre and cruel rules. He would time their showers, literally giving them just 15 seconds under cold water. He would stand there, watch, and then yank them out one after the other. They weren't allowed to use the bathroom to poop. Toilet paper was reserved for emergencies and guests. If they absolutely had to go, he would hand them exactly 5 squares of toilet paper and stand there to watch them wipe. The kids trained themselves to only go at school or church. During summer, when temperatures could reach 100 degrees, there was no air conditioning, no fans, and no open windows allowed in their bedrooms. There were about 20 more insane rules, including weird food restrictions. It was really, really sad. Story 3. I knew a woman who was a manager at the restaurant where my wife worked. She was obsessed with living through her 13-year-old daughter in the most extreme way. The girl would come to the restaurant from school, and her mom would immediately start criticizing her, saying how awful her makeup looked and questioning how she expected to attract boys like Brent or Jason looking like that. Almost everything she talked about with her coworkers revolved around her daughter's school drama. She would read her daughter's texts, give her advice on what to say, and constantly trash her appearance. Sometimes she'd even say the girl needed to dress more provocatively before going to football games. She would talk openly about encouraging boys to come over and how she liked to spy on her daughter. One time she even bragged, with a hint of pride, about walking into her daughter's room and catching her coming out from under the covers, with a boy still in bed, right in the middle of what seemed like a Sewell act. It was incredibly disturbing. Story 4. I must have been around 7 or 8 years old. I used to play with a girl who lived a few houses down from mine, across the street. Our neighborhood was safe and pretty decent, just across from the high school. However, her mom was paranoid. She never let us play outside because she was convinced there could be a drive-by shooting at any moment. Any car that drove by, she thought, could be someone with a gun who might shoot us. She even refused to let us play in the living room near the windows for the same reason. One time while I was over there, her mom pulled me aside. She pointed out a truck parked on the curb outside my house. It was my uncle's truck, and told me it was probably a burglar's vehicle and that he was likely inside my house, killing my family at that very moment. She wouldn't let me go home, fearing I might get killed too. Finally, when my mom called later to have me come home for dinner, she let me go. That family still acts strangely, even after all these years. Story 5. I knew a girl in high school whose parents were completely obsessed with dinner plates. They had an enormous collection of collectible plates, and every room in their house was filled with them on display. The entire house felt like a library specifically designed for those plates. Her bedroom was just a mattress on the floor, surrounded by display cases of plates. You couldn't even lean on any wall because they were all covered like that. The last time I went over there, I accidentally knocked one off the wall. I managed to catch it before it hit the ground, and luckily it didn't break. But the way her dad reacted was terrifying. He flew into a rage, and for a moment, I thought he was going to hit me. They tried to laugh it off nervously, saying, "Ha ha ha, good old dad being funny, ha 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 ha." One time I asked my friend why they had so many plates, and she went on a passionate rant about how cool the plates were and why they were so special. The explanation lasted for about an hour, and I never asked again. Listening to someone talk about dishware for that long felt like pure torture. Story 6. This is something I shared before, but it's worth mentioning again. I had a good friend in elementary school whose family had this bizarre setup. They lived in a farmhouse that looked like it belonged to the Addams family. Every wall in that house had a crucifix on it, massive ones about 2 to 3 feet tall. They were everywhere, in the bathroom, bedrooms, closets. There was one room upstairs that we weren't allowed to enter, so naturally we sneaked in to see it. It turned out to be a private chapel that looked like it came straight out of the Vatican, complete with burning candles, pews, an altar, and a 6-foot-tall crucifix with Jesus hanging on it. But the weirdest thing was their prayer clock. It was a cuckoo clock where the numbers on the dial were represented by the 12 disciples. I never saw what came out of the clock on the hour, but probably Jesus. Every single hour the clock would go off, and my friend's mom would gather us to write thank you prayers to put in the prayer jar. If we were playing with Legos and had a snack, I'd have to write, "Thank you, Jesus, for letting me play with Legos and eat string cheese." If I forgot to include something like the apple juice, she'd make me edit the note saying, "You don't think Jesus would be sad if you didn't thank him for the apple juice too?" By 4th grade, I stopped going over there. It was just too weird, especially after they had a new baby and declared they didn't believe in diapers. The baby just crawled around, doing its business wherever. 24 years later, what became of the kids? The youngest, the baby who used to roam around naked, became a Catholic priest. The second youngest moved away and became a transgender entertainer. And the oldest, my friend, is now a programmer in Silicon Valley. The father eventually left the mother. Story 7. For years, I visited a family where all the adult children still lived with their parents. Something odd I noticed was that every time I visited, they always had the same movie playing. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. They would all huddle around the TV, acting like they were watching it for the first time, reacting to the same scenes with the same enthusiasm. One time I stayed over longer than usual. When the movie finally ended, they turned off the TV only to turn it right back on and play the same movie again. That's when I realized they watched that movie multiple times a day, every single day, almost like a ritual. They would always react the same way to the same scenes, as if they were genuinely seeing it for the first time each time. Story 8. One day after school, I went to a guy's house to work on a project. We weren't really friends, just assigned to the same group. Let's call him Gary. We were working on the project when he excused himself to use the restroom. About 15 minutes later, he came back. A little while later, I decided to use the bathroom while he was making snacks. When I walked in, I was greeted by the sight of what Gary had left behind, a massive, unflushed poop just sitting there. I shrugged it off, thinking everyone forgets once in a while. I flushed it, did my business, and went back to working on the project. A couple of hours later, his mom came home. She greeted us politely and went toward the back of the house. Suddenly, she came back into the kitchen, furious, yelling, "Where is it?" I was completely confused, so I gave Gary a look like, "What's going on?" Gary muttered, "It wasn't me, it was him." His mom glared at me, huffed, and walked away. Gary later explained that after school every day, he was required to leave his poop in the toilet so his mom could check it. It wasn't because he was sick or anything. She just had this weird habit of making sure he was healthy. I never went back to Gary's house after that. Story 9. Back in high school, my best friend's dad did some seriously creepy stuff. When we were 13, he gave her a large diamond engagement ring and told her she couldn't get married until she found a man who could buy her a nicer one. It was so bizarre. We were just kids who spent most of our time playing N64 and riding bikes, not thinking about marriage. When everyone around us started dating, she wasn't allowed to. Eventually, she was really excited one day and told me that her dad had received a vision from God saying she was now allowed to date. I'm religious too, so I'm not knocking faith, but that definitely didn't happen. One of the creepiest incidents was at a school dance. Her dad showed up, saw her dancing with a boy, and physically pinned the guy against the wall. The police were called, and after that, her dad was banned from the school campus and all school functions, including graduation. Her mom never said a word about it, at least not that I ever heard. My friend seemed embarrassed, but more in a, oh my gosh, dads, right? Kind of way, instead of realizing just how disturbing it all was. She had two brothers who were allowed to do whatever they wanted without any of that weirdness. Story 10. In high school, I started seeing this girl. Let's call her Sarah. After a few weeks, she invited me over for dinner. Her family was classic Valley, pretty Christian, all blonde. Dad's a construction worker, mom's a hairdresser, and they lived on a dirt road. My mom dropped me off at their place, which was pretty far out of town. We were having a nice dinner, chatting about current events. Since it was early November 2012, I joked about how ridiculous it was that some people thought the world was going to end next month. Suddenly, Sarah's sister yelled, "Shut up!" The room went completely silent. Sarah glared at me. Her sister looked at their dad, and he was giving me the angriest dad stare I'd ever seen. Then Sarah's mom burst into tears and left the table. Confused, I asked, "What's wrong?" And Sarah's sister shouted, "Shut up!" again. I excused myself to the bathroom, trying to figure out how to salvage the night. When I came out, Sarah was waiting and explained that her mom got really anxious about big, depressing topics and just wanted a break from hearing about them, even when the TV was off. I apologized and Sarah said it was okay, suggesting we go downstairs to watch a movie. I thought I had saved the night until I got to the basement. The entire space was stocked for the end of the world. Guns, food, rafts, maps, everything. Trying to play it cool, I asked what it was all for, hoping for a reasonable explanation. Sarah just said, "For when God will wash the wrong, we're just being prepared." That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I walked 20 miles down the highway to get home that night. Story 11. I had a classmate from 6th through 8th grade who had a really tough childhood. She's really successful now, just graduated law school, and seems to have a happy, fulfilling life based on her social media. But back then, it was hard to watch how her family treated her. Her mom was obsessed with turning her into this prim and proper, almost Victorian-style lady. One day, she came to school with bruises on her arms. She told everyone it was from volleyball practice, but I didn't believe it. A few months later at a school dance, she asked me to dance with her, and I just came out and asked what really happened to her arm that day. Caught off guard, she admitted that she had forgotten her math book at school, and her mother had hit her. Another time, she told me she got grounded for an entire month just because her mom found the name of a cute boy from our class written in one of her notebooks. We were both in choir and the only ones who took voice lessons. During a competition at the local high school, I saw her mom screaming at her in the hallway because she hit a wrong note during her piano solo and ended up getting a second-place ribbon instead of first, which meant she couldn't advance to the next level. I tried to comfort her, but she wouldn't listen. She just congratulated me on my own first place and wouldn't say a bad word about her mom. The weirdest part is that she had 3 siblings, one older and 2 younger, who were some of the most easygoing, down-to-earth people I've ever met. I once asked her younger sister why my classmate had to meet such crazy expectations, like being fluent in French by 5th grade and taking ballet 3 times a week. Her sister just looked uncomfortable and said, "We don't talk about that." She was the sweetest girl, and I never once heard her say anything bad about anyone. I still think about her sometimes and hope she's truly happy now. Story 12. This might sound strange, but one day my parents decided I was old enough to start coming back home from school on my own. However, they apparently didn't think I was old enough to have my own set of keys. As a result, I used to spend 1 to 2 hours every day sitting on the doormat, waiting for my sister to come back from school and let me in. I was often really hungry, and unfortunately, I ended up peeing my pants at least 5 times. I was around 10 years old at the time. We were a middle-class family, and our neighbors saw me sitting there every day, but no one ever said anything. I sometimes wonder if they found it creepy or strange. After about half a year, my parents finally decided I was trustworthy enough to have keys. They made a big deal out of it, holding a funny ceremony to give me the keys, even making me sign a contract of being the official key bearer. They thought it was hilarious, but it wasn't funny to me. To this day, they still joke about how I wasn't responsible enough at age 10 to keep a set of keys. A few things to clarify. I lived in a block of flats, not a house with a yard, so there were no bushes to pee in. I wasn't sitting outside. I was on the stairs and sometimes I did pee there, but I was always scared the neighbors would come out and see me, so I figured peeing my pants was the safer option. As for why I didn't use the school bathroom, it's because they were pretty terrifying. The locks were often broken, and older girls would go in, opening every stall and laughing at whoever was inside. I didn't want to risk that, so I always held it in until I got home. I could have stayed at school for those hours, but I was afraid of being bullied, and sitting on the doormat seemed safer. I didn't really have friends to stay with either, and even if I did, I would have been too embarrassed to ask. Story 13. I went to elementary school with this girl who would host a big sleepover every year with all the girls from our class, only about 10 since it was a small school. Her parents were pretty strict about bedtime, which wasn't too unusual, but they were also extremely paranoid about robbers. They had the most intense security system I'd ever seen. After everyone got into their sleeping bags, her parents would turn on the system. It was so sensitive that you couldn't even roll over without setting it off. They would put everyone to bed at 7 p.m. and expect all of us to stay completely silent and still until morning. Every single year, without fail, someone would move, the alarm would blare, and her dad would come running downstairs with a shotgun while her mom called the cops. This happened every year. Story 14. During my first few weeks of high school, I made a new friend who invited me over to his house. His family seemed really down to earth and normal. We sat down to eat, and I don't remember much about the meal itself, but after a while I noticed something odd. My friend and his younger brother were licking every last crumb and bit of sauce off their plates. I just assumed they were really hungry after a long day. An hour later, his mom came into the room holding my dirty plate, clearly upset. She demanded to know who hadn't licked their plate clean. My friend nervously pointed at me. She was furious and asked how the next person was supposed to eat from it if I hadn't licked it clean. She left the room, and I just sat there, trying to process what I'd heard. I asked my friend if they actually washed their plates after meals. He looked at me like I was crazy and replied, "Of course we use our tongues so the next person can use it." That was the last time I went to his house. Story 15. I unfortunately grew up in the creepy family. My mom was completely obsessed with the Titanic. Every surface in our house was covered with something Titanic related. She could talk for hours about the ship, the movie, and how she believed she was the reincarnation of a passenger. She did cross-stitch projects related to the Titanic, made those strange picture carpet things, and practically had My Heart Will Go On playing on repeat every single day. She played Titanic video games, listened to the soundtrack, saved Titanic pictures online, and chatted with people about it constantly. Once, when I was in second grade, she completely rewrote my speech to be about the Titanic, came to my class, handed me the new cards, and sat there while I delivered the speech she wrote. For my birthday, she got me a Titanic t-shirt and a clock, hung them up in my room, and made it clear that I wasn't allowed to touch them. Christmas gifts were weird Titanic-themed dinner plates. She even got a Titanic tattoo. One time, I was finally allowed to have a friend's sleepover. I invited my friend, and he was immediately weirded out by the Titanic memorabilia everywhere. So we stayed in my room, which was mostly free of that stuff. In the middle of the night, around 2 a.m., my mom, who was mostly deaf, decided it would be a good idea to play My Heart Will Go On at full volume. You could feel Celine Dion's voice vibrating through the walls, floor, and right into your skull. Normally, I'd just ignore it since it had become normal to me. But my friends started asking questions. It was then that I realized, wait, he's right. Why is this okay? It was summer, we had no AC, and it was unbearably hot. Tired and annoyed, I finally decided to confront my mom. I asked her straight out, "Why are you playing My Heart Will Go On in the middle of the night?" My friend got a front row seat to my mom yanking me to the ground by my ear, screaming over the booming speakers about how she was the adult and made the decisions in the house. And as a kid, I had no right to question her. If you've never heard a mostly deaf person scream, you can't imagine how terrifying it sounds. After that, my friends stopped hanging out with me, and word spread at school that my mom was scary. I couldn't disagree. It was a wake-up call that we were the weird family. I was grounded for a week. No toys, no going outside, no TV, no radio, no books. Just sitting in my room, listening to Titanic playing from the other room. Looking back, I realize how messed up it all was. When I visit my hometown, people often tell me, "We almost called Child Protective Services." Don't almost call them, just do it. Spending 7 straight days doing nothing but listening to that song could definitely be considered abuse. Story 16. There was this white woman who used to come into the fast food place where I worked. She had two white sons and two adopted young black children, but no husband. The mom and her sons looked like they'd stepped straight out of the 1950s, neatly dressed and well kept. Her adopted children, however, didn't look as well taken care of. She owned a popular Christian pizza buffet in town, and even the napkins had Bible quotes printed on them. Whenever they came in, the sons would order the same thing every single time. The mom would do the same. But when it came to the adopted kids, she would always point at them and say, "They don't need anything. Please don't give us anything for them." One time we felt bad and decided to pay for two kids' meals ourselves. When she found out, she was furious. After ordering, they would sit at the table and wait, expecting us to bring the food out to them. Even if the food was ready and sitting on the counter, they wouldn't pick it up. It would just sit there for 20 minutes until one of us took it to them. They would pray, eat, linger for ages, and then leave. The adopted kids always looked so sad. I never understood why she refused to feed them. It was one of the most disturbing and heartbreaking things I witnessed while working there. Story 17. This one's not really creepy, more weird and kind of funny. When I was about 11 or 12, I used to go to this guy's house after school. His mom had all these strict, strange rules. One of the weirdest was that we could only have our afternoon snack at exactly 4:30. If we tried to eat at 4:27 or 4:35, she would completely lose it. She would literally check the clock before letting us eat. My friend even had a little alarm clock set to go off at 4:30 to make sure he didn't miss snack time. It was pretty crazy, but it got even stranger. She kept two separate sets of snacks in the pantry, one for her own kids and one for her kids' friends. Her own kids got the good stuff: massive jars of Nutella, crepes, brioches, all sorts of delicious pastries. The snacks for the friends, however, were the no-brand, budget kind. She would keep a close eye on us to make sure we didn't accidentally get any of the good stuff. And this wasn't a poor family. They were actually quite wealthy. It was just weird. Story 18. I once went to a friend's house, and his mom took us to McDonald's. When we got back, I realized my order was wrong. It was a completely different sandwich from what I ordered. I decided to be polite and just eat it anyway, but I planned to remove the parts I didn't like. My friend's mom wasn't having it. At first, she quietly but firmly said that no one in their house wasted food. I explained that the order was wrong, but that I would eat it anyway after removing what I didn't like. That's when she grabbed the sandwich out of my hands and put the stuff I scraped off back into the sandwich. She then said we couldn't go out until I ate the whole thing. I was freaked out and didn't feel like eating anymore. I just wanted to go home. Then she started banging her fist on the table and burst into tears, screaming at me to eat it. Her husband came into the room because of the noise and crying. He calmed her down, told us to get in the car, and drove me home. I was only 8 at the time, but that incident still makes me uneasy when I think about it. Story 19. There's a family from my hometown that everyone knows as being downright disgusting. Apparently, they've been around since the town's founding and once had a nice house on Main Street. After generations of suspected inbreeding, that once nice house turned into an eyesore in an otherwise decent neighborhood. The city eventually bought out their property and relocated them for free, right across from the town dump. A friend's dad, who worked fixing boilers, once got sent out to their new house. As soon as he arrived, he noticed a horrible smell. When he went inside, he saw the family eating at the dinner table, and underneath the table was a dead dog, the obvious source of the stench. He didn't even bother trying to fix the boiler and just left. I've heard so many gross stories about that family over the years, and after seeing their house and knowing a kid from that family in high school, I believe every one of them. Story 20. Growing up, one of my friends had a family dog that was downright evil. I love animals, especially dogs, but this one was just off. Sometimes it would just snap and bite one of the 7 kids in the family. One day it bit my friend so hard that her finger was sliced open to the bone. Instead of taking her to a doctor, the mom made excuses for the dog, and my friend didn't even bother arguing. It was like she was used to it. The mom actually sewed my friend's finger shut herself. I just sat there in shock, trying to act normal and keep talking to them, but I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I kept thinking about how easily it could have gotten infected. Nothing changed with the dog. Some of her brothers kept sitting on the couch, petting it while watching TV like nothing had happened. I definitely kept my distance from that dog. Their family also believed in energy healing and chakras, which wasn't the weird part. One time I tripped over one of their many potted plants and accidentally tore one of its leaves. The mom made me sit by the plant and feel what I had done, apologizing until the plant forgave me. My friend's younger sister, who supposedly could see people's chakras and the plant's energy, sat with me until she said the plant's energy had turned back to a happy color. There were plenty of other bizarre stories from that family, but those were the ones that stuck with me the most. Story 21. I was friends with these twin brothers in high school, and they would always come over to my house. One day, they finally invited me over to theirs, which was in the same neighborhood. When I walked in, the house was a mess, but I didn't really mind since my own house could get pretty cluttered too. Everything seemed normal at first. We played video games until it was time for dinner. They invited me to stay and eat, and after dinner, I went to the kitchen to put my plate in the sink. That's when I noticed the huge pile of dirty dishes, the filthy stove, and worst of all, roaches crawling all over it. One of the twins came in behind me to grab a glass from the cabinet. When he opened the door, hundreds of roaches were crawling on the inside, all over the glasses and plates, the same type of plate I had just eaten from. He found it funny and yelled, "It's alive!" like it was a joke. I nearly threw up right there. I didn't say a word. I just turned around, left, and never spoke to them again. A few years later, I saw one of them at a gas station. His teeth were yellow and brown, just a complete mess. He works at a nearby Rally's now, but I definitely avoid eating there. Story 22. When I was in 7th grade, my parents decided to homeschool me because I wasn't focusing much in regular school. Since they both worked full-time, they couldn't do it themselves. My mom found a family through a friend that offered to homeschool me along with their 4 children. One of the kids was a little girl, about 7 years old. During lunch one day, her mom put a plate of food in front of her and set a timer next to it. The girl had to eat all her food before the timer went off. If she didn't finish on time, the mom would take her into a bedroom and scream at her as loud as possible. It sounded like she was also being spanked with a belt. The whole thing was uncomfortable to witness. The weird part was that her 3 older brothers didn't have to follow this rule. They could eat whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, and take as long as they liked. I didn't last long in that environment, went back to public school within the year. Story 23. There was a family in my small hometown that everyone knew was strange. The community was tight-knit, with around 300 kids in the K-12 school, so everyone knew everyone pretty well. The kids in this family seemed nice, if a bit sheltered, but the parents were just plain odd. If you went to their house to see if one of the kids could come out, the parents would only open the door a tiny crack. They would peer out as if you were definitely up to no good. You'd never see more than half their face at most. The windows were always heavily curtained, and the kids were rarely allowed out except for school or church. The mother was such a recluse that I think I only saw her once in an entire year. The weirdest part was their obsession with cleanliness. Every time the kids came home, they had to bathe immediately. If they went out multiple times a day, they bathed each time they returned. On top of that, they were regularly given enemas, at least once a week, because the parents believed that harmful metals were constantly being absorbed into their bodies. The enemas were supposedly to cleanse these metals, and the parents were the ones administering these enemas, even to the older kids. It was bizarre and honestly disturbing. One of their daughters, who was 15, started secretly dating an 18-year-old from my school and got pregnant. They had to sneak around to see each other at school and church because the kids weren't allowed to date. After she got pregnant, they got married immediately. The guy later told me how weird life was in that house. No movies, no TV, no music unless it was church-related. It wasn't even typical for Mormon families in our town, just theirs. After they got married, the girl continued giving her newborn baby the same metal-cleansing enemas. Her husband tried to argue with her, but she would just do it when he was at work. Eventually, they got divorced because of her strange medical practices. Now the baby only gets the enemas half the year. Story 24. When I was growing up, one of my friends had this little dog that was just plain vicious. I'm a huge animal lover, especially dogs, but something was seriously wrong with this one. It would randomly snap and bite one of the 7 kids in the family. One day, it bit my friend so hard that it sliced her finger open to the bone. Instead of taking her to a doctor, the mom made excuses for the dog. My friend didn't even bother arguing. It was like she was used to it. Then, the mom actually sewed her daughter's finger shut herself. I just sat there in shock, pretending to act normal. but I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The rest of the family didn't seem bothered either. Some of the boys just kept petting the dog while watching TV. They also believed in energy healing and chakras. One time I accidentally tore a leaf off one of their many potted plants. The mom made me sit by the plant and feel what I had done, apologizing until the plant forgave me. My friend's younger sister, who supposedly could see chakras and plant energy, sat with me until she said the plant's energy had turned back to a happy color. That family had so many bizarre rules and beliefs, but those were the moments that really stuck with me. Story 25. My cousin's family is very strict and deeply involved in the Jehovah's Witness faith. They weren't always like that, but as my uncle, by marriage, got more into his faith over the years, he also became a lot more controlling and, frankly, a bit of a jerk. He would whistle at his wife and kids as if they were dogs whenever he wanted them to come to him. He banned any violent or ungodly media from the house and didn't allow his daughter to date because, according to him, she shouldn't be dating anyone unless she was already ready to marry him. Here are some of the most memorable moments from my time there. We used to play Yu-Gi-Oh cards together, but that stopped when my uncle saw the cards one day. He decided they were demonic, especially one called Leviathan, which he claimed was an ancient demon of the devil, according to the Bible. I got chewed out after he found my Harry Potter book in his daughter's room. She had been reading it secretly, and he considered it satanic. One time, my cousin and I were playing Killzone in his room, and when my uncle found out, he damn near broke down the door to catch us. While I was listening to the new System of a Down CD with my cousin, my uncle heard the track titled Question and got really upset. The song, which is about the unsettling thoughts around human existence and mortality, freaked him out so much that he told me to go home and said I wasn't allowed back until he decided it was okay. To be honest, my uncle isn't a bad guy at heart. He taught me a lot growing up, especially since I didn't have much of a father figure myself. He's hardworking, has a successful small business, and even built his own house. But his fanatical faith has made him a poor parent and husband, and it's hard to be around that part of my family now. Story 26. I don't know these people personally, but we came across them one Christmas while traveling through Roswell, New Mexico, near Area 51. My whole extended family and I were on our way to stay in a cabin in the mountains for the holidays, and we stopped at a Dairy Queen to eat and regroup. While we were eating, a well-dressed family walked in, barefoot, every single one of them. Keep in mind it was December in New Mexico, right before a lot of snow, so it was really cold outside. They ordered their food, sat down, and didn't say a single word to each other the entire time they were there. About an hour. The weirdest part was the younger girl, who wouldn't stop staring directly at me the whole time. None of them spoke a word, and when they finally finished, they got up and left just as silently as they had come in. To this day, my family still jokes about the little alien child who seemed to have a crush on me. Story 27. When I was about 15, I became friends with two guys from my Boy Scout troop. They were really nice, and eventually invited me to stay at their place for a week while my parents were out of town. When I got there, everything seemed normal at first. Their mom cooked dinner that night, burgers. After we had filled our plates, their mom poured everyone a glass of milk. I remember thinking, who drinks milk with burgers? But I didn't want to be rude, so I drank it. What struck me as weird was that their mom wouldn't let anyone leave the table until we had all drunk 2 glasses of milk each, at every single meal. Steaks for dinner, milk, salmon, milk. I eventually asked my friends why their mom was so strict about milk, and they told me it was because she believed if they drank enough milk, they'd never break a bone. It got even stranger. After every meal, whatever was left on anyone's plate would be scraped into a big crock pot. They'd keep adding leftovers to it throughout the week, regardless of what it was. Chicken wings, mashed potatoes, even bones. Come Friday, they'd heat it all up and serve it as family stew. It wasn't just meat scraps. They'd throw in entire leftovers, bones and all. I tried to politely decline, but they looked at me like I was being rude, so I just picked at it and hoped not to bite into anything too questionable. Needless to say, I didn't spend another week at their house. Story 28. I work with a woman who was raised in an extremely cis environment. Her father ingrained in her from a young age that men should make all the household rules, and that higher education was only meant for men. She completely internalized these beliefs, and it's been causing her serious problems as an adult. We both instruct martial arts, And one day I was covering the front counter when she approached me after class. I'm only 20 and a guy, so I was surprised she chose to talk to me about this. She asked if she should say something if someone had intentionally groped her during class. I was stunned that she didn't already know the answer. She was genuinely unsure if it was worth mentioning. I immediately told her how important it was to report it and assured her I would handle it right away. The guy responsible is gone. What really shocked me was that she revealed this had been going on for about a year. A whole year of enduring that without speaking up. Her upbringing has also affected her marriage. Over the past year, her husband has become increasingly controlling. He's forcing her to move to North Carolina, 1,000 miles away, even though his job is stable where they are. There's no real reason to move, he just wants to. She's broken down crying to me multiple times, saying she has no say in the decision. I've encouraged her to open up about how she feels, but despite promising she would, they're still moving in a month. It's heartbreaking to see how her upbringing has convinced her that her opinions don't matter. Story 29. I have two weird stories for you, but the creepiest part is at the end. When I was about 9 or 10, I made friends with a girl who lived a few houses away. She had two brothers, one older, one younger, and they had a trampoline, so I'd be over there almost every day during the summer. One day her parents invited me to go to church with them. Her dad was the pastor, and although I wasn't religious, I had been to church before, so I agreed to go. This wasn't just any church. It was one of those massive Christian megachurches with at least 1,000 members, complete with a cafe, a library, and a huge auditorium. During the sermon, the pastor, my friend's dad, said, "If you haven't accepted Jesus Christ as your Savior, come up here now." A few others went up, but I just stayed put. Suddenly, the mom turned to me and whispered, "Go on, sweetie." I tried to politely decline, but then the pastor called my name on the microphone, in front of at least 500 people. I was mortified. I had no choice but to walk up to the stage, stand there in front of everyone, and repeat lines about accepting Jesus. Some grown men were crying, one of them breaking down on stage. I was so embarrassed that I just wanted to disappear. Afterward, I put on a fake smile, but inside I was screaming. I just wanted to go home. Then came the really creepy part. On the way back, I politely asked if they could drop me off at my house since it was nearby. The mom said, "Oh, honey, we were hoping you could join us for dinner too." I didn't want to be rude, so I reluctantly agreed. When dinner was ready, we sat down at the table. Everything looked normal except for a framed picture of Jesus placed in the center. The father said, "Grace," and I thought we were about to eat. But no. He picked up the picture, looked at it, and said, "Thank you for providing us with this wonderful meal." Then he kissed the picture. He passed it to his wife, who did the same. Then the kids followed suit. When my friend handed it to me, I had no choice but to say the line and kiss the picture too. That was the last time I ever went to their house. Story 30. Back in 1982 or 1983, in Chalmette, Louisiana, my mom was dating this guy whose dad was pretty wealthy. The dad was an older Italian guy, probably in his early 60s, always dressed in a suit, and he had a much younger, attractive wife. We had met them a couple of times before, but never been to their house. One weekend, my mom got really excited because we were invited to the dad's house for dinner. As we drove there, the houses got nicer and nicer. Not mansions, but definitely upscale. When we pulled up, the house looked great from the outside. Nice lawn, well kept. But the moment I stepped out of the car, I was hit with this smell, like mosquito spray. Now, back in New Orleans during the 70s and 80s, they used to have mosquito spray trucks that drove around neighborhoods, spraying toxic chemicals to kill mosquitoes. The smell was unmistakable and suffocating. I thought maybe the truck had just passed by because that's exactly what it smelled like. As we walked closer to the house, the smell got worse, overwhelmingly so. My mom's boyfriend knocked on the door, and his dad answered, looking as put together as always in some kind of sporty casual wear. Immediately, little dogs started barking from inside. My mom gave me this look that said she was just as confused as I was. When we stepped inside, I realized that the terrible smell wasn't coming from outside. It was the house itself. At first glance, it looked like a normal, upper-middle-class home with nice furniture, but on closer inspection, everything was covered in trash and dog shesh. The floors were layered with old, rotting garbage and dried dog turds that were turning gray in the heat. The trash even piled up against the walls like a dirty, sloping cave. The linoleum floor in the kitchen was smeared with dried dog shh, as if people had slipped around in it and it had solidified. The smell was a suffocating mix of rotting garbage, dog feces, and what seemed like roach spray, like they had tried to cover up the stench but made it even worse. As we stood there, trying to process what we were seeing, the wife came in from the kitchen to greet us. Just as she did, she accidentally kicked a dried dog turd that skittered across the floor and hit my shoe like a little mouse. She just kept smiling and talking as if nothing had happened. "Hey y'all, I've been making some gumbo and it's just about ready." Even as a kid from New Orleans, I knew gumbo could be sketchy if not made right. But with that smell and the thought of whatever might end up in that pot, I immediately thought, there's no way I'm eating that. Feeling like I was going to throw up or pass out, I asked if I could use the bathroom without even thinking. The wife pointed down a hallway that was so filled with trash it was almost impassable, and the barking from more dogs was deafening. I just froze. Thankfully, my mom put a hand on my shoulder and said, "It's okay, just wait outside." I mumbled an apology and bolted out the door. I stood outside for about 10 minutes, just breathing in the relatively fresh air, even though it still smelled a bit like the house. Eventually, my mom came out, without her boyfriend, thanked the dad and his wife, and we left. As we drove away, my mom whispered through her teeth, "Wait till we're in the car." Once we were safely driving away, she started apologizing profusely, saying she had no idea it would be like that. She couldn't believe what she'd seen, and neither could I. She explained that she had told them I wasn't feeling well, so she was taking me home, but she still planned to go back and have dinner with them. We went back to that house a few more times afterward, but I always stayed in the car. I'd rather sit in the heat than go back in that nightmare of a house. Even years later, I never really figured out what was going on. My mom never talked about it much, and she passed away about 15 years ago, so I can't ask her anymore. I guess the whole scene was so bizarre that she didn't know how to address it. It was like the entire family just accepted that living in a house filled with trash and dog feces was normal. To this day, I still don't know how to process that experience. Story 31. My close friend Hannah has one of the most unusual family situations I've ever heard of. Hannah's parents are both white Catholics who don't believe in divorce. Hannah is the youngest of 5 siblings and she's 18. Her 3 oldest siblings are all Caucasian, just like their parents. However, her 4th sibling, who's only 2 years older than her, is half Native American, and Hannah herself is half black. All 5 children were born to the same mother, and her parents didn't adopt any of them, nor did they use sperm donation. So what happened? Hannah's mother cheated, twice. First with a Native American guy, resulting in her 4th sibling, then with a black man, resulting in Hannah. Neither biological father is listed on the birth certificates, and neither pays child support. Despite the affairs, Hannah's legal father chose not to divorce his wife because he didn't want to cause a scandal. He stayed with her, even after it happened a second time. Hannah's well-adjusted despite it all, and although she doesn't get along with her parents, she considers her legal father to be her only real dad. Story 32. When I was a teenager, my younger sister and I used to ride the bus with a neighbor girl and her younger brother. Let's call them Jane and Dick. Jane was always really chatty, but she never talked about anything particularly interesting. My sister used to smirk every time Jane tapped me on the shoulder to tell me what she'd learned in math or history that day. We were in the same grade but in different classes since I was taking AP courses. On good days I'd talk with her, but on bad days I'd just want to tune out with my Discman. No matter how many times I put my headphones back on, Jane would tap me again, eager to continue the conversation. I tried steering the talk towards hobbies, movies, music, or books, but Jane had never watched, read, or listened to anything other kids our age did. She had no hobbies and very little to say beyond school stuff. Her brother, Dick, rarely spoke at all. My sister and I were friendly to Jane, probably more so than most, which is why we were the only non-church friends invited to her 17th birthday party. Her dad was a children's pastor, and most of the guests were from their church. When we arrived, Jane's mom showed us her bedroom, proudly pointing out a cat-themed window valance she had just sewn. She explained, "I can't have anyone thinking Jane's room is too plain." The rest of the room was incredibly sterile and devoid of personality, just a hint at how strict her parents were. Then came the birthday activities. The first event was a photo scavenger hunt, but all the items were people. At 8 a.m. on a Saturday, we spent 2 hours knocking on neighbors' doors, waking them up, and asking personal questions to see if they fit any of the items on the list. We took pictures of them in their bathrobes and pajamas with a disposable camera. My sister and I cringed the whole time, especially since our parents knew these neighbors through the HOA. We just hoped they wouldn't recognize us later. Next, Jane opened her presents. Her mom insisted on taking multiple photos of each girl hugging Jane before and after opening the gift. The dad was hovering over us, talking in an exaggerated sing-song voice like we were toddlers. Is everyone having fun? Are you girls having fun? For lunch, we had a pea and carrot casserole while Jane's mom left to develop the photos. The birthday cake was Cool Whip mixed with lime juice served in a pie tin. We all tried to be polite, but it was barely edible. When the party ended, we were given souvenir photos of our neighbors looking annoyed and confused in their sleepwear. A few years later, Dick left home the moment he turned 18, and Jane ran off to Vegas, eloping with an older guy she met online. I never heard from either of them again. Story 33. Because my dad was a lazy asshole, I ended up feeding and caring for horses for a wealthy family while we lived on their property rent-free. My dad was the one who responded to the ad, but he just left me to do all the work. Over time, I became like another daughter to the family. I grew up around their kids, stayed at their house, joined them for holidays, and even went on vacations with them. I was a few years younger than their oldest son, but older than their youngest. One night, I made a lighthearted joke about what their oldest son might be up to, just because I knew him pretty well. Suddenly, his mom lost it. She shrieked at me that her 18-year-old son would never keep a secret from her and would tell her everything for his entire life. I was just stunned. I glanced at the son, and he gave me this look like, yeah, she's nuts. I'd known him for years, and while his secrets were pretty harmless, like sneaking a few beers at home, smoking a little weed, or fooling around with girls, I would never have ratted him out. I'd always just quietly taken the blame for the beers and kept quiet about everything else. But that moment, when his mom declared with absolute conviction that he would tell her every single thing about his life, was like staring into pure insanity. Who would want to know every detail of their teenage son's life? And who honestly believes that any 18-year-old would spill every thought and action to their mom? It was so unsettling because it wasn't just that she believed it. It was how she believed it, with complete certainty, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. It was like looking directly at a delusion, and I couldn't help but feel a chill run through me. Story 34. A few years ago, I decided to move to the capital city of my state. Some friends who still lived with their parents offered to let me stay at their place until I found somewhere to rent. They didn't tell me, though, that their parents were probably the most miserable people I'd ever met. Their mom used to be a teacher, but after one particularly bad class, she retired and became almost completely unresponsive. She spent all day, every day, sitting at the computer playing RuneScape, with the TV constantly blaring in the background. I tried to thank her once for letting me stay, but she didn't even look at me. Her eyes stayed glued to the screen. Their dad did have a job, but whenever he was home, he would just walk around the house in a bad mood, berating me for the smallest things. I liked my friends, so it wasn't a completely miserable experience, but it definitely felt surreal. A mutual friend later confided that the parents had made her cry on several occasions. I wasn't surprised at all. It was honestly one of the most uncomfortable living arrangements I've ever been in, and I felt bad for my friends who had to live with that every day. Story 35. In high school, I was friends with a girl whose family was, to put it mildly, strange. Her dad was a doctor, some kind of specialist. Her mom was extremely anxious and rarely left the house, not even to drive. There were 3 siblings, the eldest brother and 2 daughters. I was friends with the middle daughter. One day while we were driving somewhere, I casually mentioned I had an upcoming gynecologist appointment. She responded, "Oh, my dad does that for us." I nearly choked, trying to hold back my reaction. I asked if she ever considered going to a different doctor, and she just looked at me like I was being unreasonable. She explained that her dad didn't trust other doctors to do pelvic exams on his daughters. He was an ENT, an ear, nose, and throat doctor. I had even seen him myself for hay fever meds once. But to hear that he performed pelvic exams on his own teenage daughters? That was horrifying. Now that I'm older, I realize just how deeply disturbing that was, and it honestly just makes me feel sad for her and her siblings. Story 36. When I was in high school, I knew this guy who was a bit odd and got bullied a lot. I regret not standing up for him more, but I was too caught up in my own social status at the time. When we were around 14, I went to his house for the first time. He lived with his two younger brothers, and it was clear the parents let them do whatever they wanted. The place was pretty messy. One thing I noticed right away was that his bedroom door looked like it had been beaten up pretty badly. I didn't think much of it, assuming it was just old or something. We were playing video games when we heard shouting outside the room. My friend immediately jumped up and locked the door. I asked him what was going on, and he casually said that his brothers had lost their temper. Then the banging started. Loud, aggressive banging on the door, and it wasn't fists. It sounded like they were hitting it with something solid. I asked what the hell was happening, and he calmly replied, "They're trying to break the door down with a cricket bat. They've never managed to do it before. If I don't lock the door, they'll come in and hit me with it." He said it so casually, like it was just a regular thing. I couldn't believe it. He seemed almost numb to it. I later found out he passed away about 10 years ago, and I saw his brothers a few times after that. They seemed completely normal, so maybe it was just a phase, but it was horrifying at the time. Story 37. When I was 13, I met this kid while skateboarding around the Navy base where we both lived. He was goofy and outgoing when we were out and about. One day he invited me over to his house. As soon as we walked through the door, he completely changed, turned serious and almost robotic. His parents moved around the house like drones, expressionless and methodical. His mom sat him down at the table and gave him a single slice of white bread. I thought it was odd, but I didn't say anything. Then his dad called me into another room where there was just a small kid's chair and a TV VCR combo on a table. He put in a tape and made me watch it. It was an hour-long church rant about how AC/DC's song, Hell's Bells, was corrupting youth by glorifying hell. The dad stood there the entire time, making sure I watched the whole thing and quizzing me afterward. The house was filled with religious items and guns, AR rifles on racks in the living room, shotguns, pistols, and the laundry room doubled as an ammo reloading station. I left feeling angry and confused, and I never hung out with that kid again. Later on, I heard that his family was planning to falsely accuse the Navy of causing his mom to fall, hoping for a payout. Not long after, military police showed up at their house, and soon after that, they were gone. To this day, Hell's Bells is one of my favorite songs, and I still think about how bizarre that whole experience was. Story 38. When my kids were little, around 2 and 4 years old, we were friends with another family from their preschool. Setting up a play date took some time because they lived a bit further away, but eventually the day came. I, a 30-something dad, showed up with my kids and a backpack full of their stuff. As soon as we walked in, I was greeted by a surprising sight. Both of the other family's kids were completely naked. To make it even more uncomfortable, there was a girl who had to be about 8 or 9 also walking around without a stitch of clothing. The mom acted like it was the most normal thing in the world. I was doing my best to avert my eyes, focusing on literally anything else, when she casually said, "Oh, they just strip down when they come home. Nothing I can do about it," and then gave this awkward little laugh. My kids were too young to think anything of it, so the play date went fine from their perspective. Eventually, the dad came home, and I stayed for a beer with him. Afterward, we left. We remained friendly with the family for a couple of years after that, but rarely went over to their place. Only when we'd received so many invitations that it would have been rude not to. That was about 15 years ago, and to this day, I can still remember every detail of the floor tile in their house, but I have absolutely no recollection of what any of those kids looked like. Story 39. I knew this kid in high school who was really nice, but definitely a bit odd. His family originally came from New York City, but he grew up in Pennsylvania. I knew they weren't well off, but what really baffled me was that his dad would take a Greyhound bus to New York City every day for work. That trip took about 2.5 hours one way, costing around $80 per day back then. I couldn't understand how that made financial sense, but I guess his job must have made it worth it. What was even stranger was that they refused to get haircuts anywhere but NYC. Once a month, they would travel back specifically to get their haircut because his mom insisted that no one outside the city knew how to do it right. In an effort to save money, they also had weird rules about electricity. He was only allowed to do his schoolwork in the kitchen, but he wasn't allowed to turn on the kitchen light. Instead, he had to turn on the bathroom light on the other side of the room and use the ambient light to see what he was doing. He wasn't allowed to have a job or hang out with friends much either. On top of all that, he once claimed that at 18, he had never masturbated. It was hard to believe, but somehow I didn't doubt him. Individually, these things weren't that crazy, but together they painted a picture of a really strange upbringing. Story 40. When I was a kid, around 10 or 11, my parents would sometimes send me and my siblings to stay with our grandma for a few days so they could get a break. Opposite my grandma's house lived a family with two girls, and I'd often hang out with them in the communal garden. One day it started to rain, and they invited me inside to play on their Dreamcast. Of course I went in. They had a cat and a rabbit, and I was sitting cross-legged on the floor playing Sonic Adventure. At one point I put my hand on the carpet to get more comfortable and felt something small, soft and round between my fingers. I picked it up to inspect it, only to realize it was rabbit poop. One of the girls just casually said, "Oh, that's just the rabbit poops." I was pretty grossed out, but I just kept my cool. I excused myself to the bathroom to wash my hands and, on the way upstairs, noticed a cat turd on the stairs. That was enough for me. I decided I needed to get out of there. When I came back down, their mom popped her head out of the kitchen to say that dinner was almost ready. I figured I'd take the opportunity to politely excuse myself. I went into the kitchen to thank her, and when I opened the door, I was greeted by the sight of her squatting over a red bucket, taking a show. I just stammered out something polite and left as quickly as possible, trying to process what I had just seen. I will never forget that goddamn red bucket. Story 41. My mother-in-law has a family living in the trailer next door, a mom, a dad, and their 21-year-old son. The son looks and acts like a 15-year-old, and I was genuinely shocked to find out he wasn't one of the high school kids I sometimes substitute for. He's got scraggly facial hair, rosy cheeks, and dresses like an awkward high school kid. I learned that he's not allowed to get his driver's license, drive the family vehicle, or get a job. He just stays home all day gaming or doing whatever. I once hung out with him at a birthday party, and the mom wouldn't stop making fun of him, calling him a wussy and saying he's useless, laughing about how he looks like a damn 12-year-old, ha ha ha. It was uncomfortable to watch. He's a full-grown adult with normal mental abilities. Apparently, he's supposed to go to Marine Corps boot camp this summer, barely meeting the minimum run time and pull-up requirements. I really hope he makes it and finally breaks free from his parents, who seem determined to keep him a perpetual child. Story 42. One day I went over to a neighbor Shasher friend's house down the street to play on his new Sega Saturn. Another friend from the neighborhood was there too. At one point, it was just me and him playing, and I guess I was winning because he, being a few years older, kept slapping the controller out of my hand. It hit the floor several times and eventually it just stopped working. Either later that day or the next, his mom confronted me, accusing me of breaking the controller. The other kid, the one who actually broke it, denied everything. I kept trying to explain that Chris kept knocking it out, but she kept cutting me off, asking if I broke it or not. Then things got really weird. She looked into my eyes every time I said I didn't do it and said, "There's a devil in your eyes." She asked again, and when I repeated that I didn't break it, she just kept insisting that I had a devil in my eyes. Finally, exhausted and frustrated, I just agreed that I broke it to make her stop. Suddenly, she smiled and said, "Now there are angels in your eyes," but told me I wasn't allowed over until I paid for the controller. After some time passed, I started going back over there, and it seemed like they eventually figured out that the other kid was the one who actually broke it. They just kind of forgot about blaming me. Story 43. When I was around 10 or 11, my mom needed to leave me somewhere for the day because she had something important to do. One of her friends offered to watch me. The lady had two kids, a 6-year-old girl and an 8-year-old boy. Most of the day was fine. She gave us snacks and let us watch TV. She would just hover in the background, doing adult stuff. Then sometime in the afternoon, she just left. She didn't say anything about where she was going or that she'd be gone, just got in her car and left us alone. It took me about 15 minutes to realize we were home alone. I started freaking out because I had no idea where she went or what to do. The 8-year-old didn't seem to care at all, but the 6-year-old freaked out with me and started crying. I was even more panicked because I didn't know how to handle a younger kid crying. I didn't have any siblings and felt way out of my depth. The lady came back about 2 hours later and saw two upset kids. She got super mad at me, yelling about how I had gotten her daughter worked up over nothing. I spent the rest of the day trying to stay out of her way.